We're gearing up now to start to add some complexity to the behaviors that we're training. And so, in order to do that, the concept of chaining is going to be a really important one for you guys. So, we've taught some foundational behaviors, some basic building blocks. These things look a little weird and different from what we do in traditional horsemanship. Maybe we're touching the target, we're stepping on the target, we're following the target, we're standing still. It's really simple chunks, but there are things that we can then chain together to make more complex behaviors and start to do the more quote unquote normal stuff that we want to do with our horses. So, the definition of chaining is training the individual components independently of one another and then combining them together in a sequence, essentially. So, we have two options primarily when we're thinking about chaining. We can either pick forward chaining or we can pick back chaining. We'll go through what both of these are, and you would choose these different chaining methods based on the behavior that you're trying to accomplish. They each have their own pros and cons. So let's look at forward chaining first. This is the one I think comes most naturally to our human brains. It's where we would start with the first behavior in the chain first, and we just keep adding successive steps until the chain is completed. So the example that I have here for the behavior we're gonna kind of work through is training a barrel pattern. So if we're forward chaining, we might first train entering through the arena alleyway. That has to happen first. Then we would go enter through the arena and turn the first barrel on the right lead. And then we would go enter through the arena, turn the first barrel on the right lead, change leads between barrels. Then enter through the arena, turn first barrel, change leads, turn second barrel, and on until we get to the very end. So you can see how by working in that repetition and that now chained loop, we get lots and lots of practice with that first behavior. We're entering through the arena in the beginning of every loop as we add additional links to our chain. So that behavior might get practiced far more often than the last bit of running for home because we're going to add run for home at the very end. Sometimes we have behaviors where front chaining, forward chaining is the only option that we have. So if we were talking about loading on a trailer, for example, we can't really practice backing off of the trailer until we're on the trailer. So we kind of have to train stepping up onto the trailer as the first piece of the chain and backing off the trailer as a later piece of the chain. We can't go backwards. But with the barrel pattern, we could go either way, right? And we'll talk about back chaining on our next slide. But I just want to quickly go over some downsides to forward chaining, just so when we get to back chaining, we've covered this a little bit, and you'll see the difference. So with our forward chaining, we get very familiar, as I mentioned, with that first behavior in the chain, and the end is going to be less familiar to them. They're going to be working towards an unknown. They know what they're starting with. They're not quite sure when this chain of behaviors is going to end. What are we working towards? So if something early in our chain is disrupted, if one of these links breaks down, then the rest of the chain is also going to break down. So continuing with our example of a barrel pattern, you might find that having the end of the behavior break down, the end of the chain break down, would be a really problematic thing. Running for home is pretty important, right? So there are times when we really might want to consider our option of back chaining instead. And in this type of chaining, we're going to teach the final behavior first and add links in our chain backwards. So we're going to run for home and get that solid first, and then we're going to turn the third barrel and run for home. Then turn the second barrel, turn the third barrel, run for home. Then we're going to do our lead change, turn second barrel, turn third barrel, run for home. Then we're going to go first, second, third, run for home, and then we'll finally add the entering through the alleyway. So with back chaining, we're working from unknown to more and more well known over time. So the horse is increasingly familiar with the later steps in the chain, and they're getting more confident as they go. They know what to expect, they know what's coming. And so they start to build what we call behavioral momentum as they get going along this chain. So the first step is going to maybe be the weakest, but as they progress through that barrel pattern, they know where they're headed, they know what's coming, and by the time they get to that run for home, they're super confident, they know what they're doing, and they can do it with 100% intensity because they're confident with it. So I've got a little video here of me teaching my gelding the barrel pattern, and I just want you guys to notice how much I'm using my target in the beginning. He's walking, he's kind of, lackadaisical, and as we start to get to the later pieces, he picks up his trot on his own. I use the target less, and he's putting a lot more energy in because he knows where we're headed. And I'll let you guys watch that one more time without me talking over it. So with back chaining, we have a decreased risk of our chain breaking if some link along the way gets disrupted because we have that behavioral momentum. But if we've back chained a behavior, we need to be aware that once we get that chain started, it might be difficult to stop halfway. So that's the potential negative downside to back chaining. If we start the horse on our back chained barrel pattern and we get to barrel 2 and decide we would like to stop, there's a chance that the horse is going to continue on because of that behavioral momentum, and it's difficult to stop. So there's all kinds of examples we could give with that, but I thought that one was kind of clear pieces to stick together. We can chain absolutely anything. We want to make sure when we're chaining that we're really solid with each individual link before we start adding the links together. So we want fluency with each piece before we start to add them. And we want our loops to be clean. So we don't want any unwanted bits of behavior in those links because it's going to then be in our chain, right? So if your horse gets confused, anxious, frustrated, as always, that's just our sign. We need to go back. We need to clear up something that is either unclear to the horse or we're unclear in our own criteria. And if we get stuck, we're going to break it down into smaller approximations. So I really think about chaining as like an expanded version of shaping. We shape our individual pieces, we start to add them together, and our rules for progressing along are the same. We want clean loops, we want the horse confident and understanding what we're looking for and having clarity around their training. And we would start with our rewarding each link in the chain, and over time we might work towards we start the chain, we complete all these behaviors, and then we reward at the completion of the entire chain. So that's where we start to build more distance between the time of reinforcement. So when we're shaping in the beginning, we're shaping with rapid reinforcement. We're clicking very frequently, we're rewarding often. And as the horse gains experience and is doing more complex things, and we're building links in our chains, and we're increasing the amount of behavior we're expecting, we are feeding now less often. But the interesting thing about this is if we go back to our classical conditioning that we talked about in the very beginning, we've now repeated these behaviors and paired them with food over and over and over again, especially if you've gotten it to the point of now adding this behavior to a chain. You've had lots and lots of practice with this behavior. It's been paired with food, and now that behavior can start to become reinforcing. The dog is going to salivate at the bell. The horse is going to get that dopamine, those good feelings from this behavior. before the food is even present. The behavior starts to take on the same positive association. And so your behaviors in your chain can start to reinforce the behaviors before them in the chain. And then the food at the end is the grand finale. Thank you to keep everything nice and strong. Keep that reinforcement history there. But your individual links can start to become reinforcing too. So that's kind of like where we're headed, big picture. It's a lot of conceptual theory stuff to stick into one little course. I've taken massive courses on this that took months to get through, and I'm distilling it down for you. But I want to give you guys a little bit of a taste of where you can take this and just how powerful this tool of positive reinforcement is, because I think it can look and feel like trick training and cute little things we can do with our horse, but like really the power here is endless. It can be used to do like incredibly complex behaviors with not frequent feeding, which is kind of where people are worried about having to have food constantly on them, and you can start to increase the amount of time, the amount of behavior that you're expecting for each treat, but that it takes time. That's a long-term plan, it's a long-term project, but chaining is one tool that will get you there. Okay, so now it is your turn to make a plan and give it a try. Decide on a behavior that you want to chain and write it out. I think it's really helpful in the beginning, just like with our shaping plans, to write it out, make the list of steps that you would expect to go through, and then give it a try. You're going to find sometimes your plan was spot on and it worked great. And sometimes you try something and you're like, oh man, I missed some steps in there. There were some things that I should have worked on first. And you can go back and edit your plan. That's how you get better at doing this. And our horses are very forgiving and willing to help us work through this, I find, most of the time. So I hope you guys will take a minute, make some plans, and go try it with your horses and see how it goes. And then edit your plan, do it better next time, and on and on and on.